Hey, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm really glad you found this channel. Go ahead and get comfortable. Pull the blanket up, turn the lights down low, plug in your earphones if you've got them, because tonight we're going deep. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, the slow, atmospheric keep you up at night kind, hit that subscribe button and leave me a comment down below. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me if you've had your own experience at a gas station late at night, because I read every single one of those comments and they never stop surprising me. Tonight's compilation is something I've been putting together for a while. These are real accounts first, person experiences, stories that were shared with me or that I lived through myself, and every single one of them takes place at a gas station in the early hours of the morning. There's something about those places after midnight, the fluorescent lights humming over empty pumps, the silence broken only by the sound of distant highway noise, and your own breath fogging in the cold air. Gas stations at 3 in the morning are supposed to be safe. They're supposed to be public. They're lit up. There are cameras. There's usually at least one person inside behind thick glass, and yet every one of these stories will remind you that being in a lit-up, public place does not mean you are safe. So go ahead, settle in, let's begin. The first time I ever felt genuinely unsafe at a gas station, I was 23 years old. I had just finished a late shift at the restaurant where I worked as a line cook. This was in eastern Tennessee, a stretch of highway between the mid-sized city I lived in and the rural county where I'd grown up, and I was driving home on a road I'd driven 1,000 times. The drive normally took about 40 minutes. The restaurant didn't close until midnight, and by the time we'd cleaned the kitchen and done close-out prep, it was usually closer to 1:30 or 2 in the morning before I was actually in my car. So late nights, early morning drives, that was just part of my life back then. I didn't think much of it. I was young and I figured I could handle anything. It was late October. The trees on either side of the highway had gone full autumn, though in the dark you couldn't really see the color, just the shapes of branches bare enough to let the cold through. The temperature had dropped hard that week. My car at the time was a 2003 Honda Civic with a heat system that worked maybe 60% of the time, and that night it had decided not to work at all. I had my jacket on. My hands were cold on the wheel. I remember thinking about a bowl of soup, about my bed, about nothing much in particular. About 20 minutes into the drive, I noticed my fuel gauge sitting right at the edge of the orange. I'd been meaning to stop for gas all week, and kept forgetting. There was a station I knew about 8 or 9 miles up the road, a Shell, one of those standalone stations, with a small attached convenience store. Not a big corporate travel center, just a regular roadside station. I'd stopped there maybe a dozen times over the years, usually during the day. I'd never had any reason to think twice about it. I pulled off the highway, guided the Civic under the canopy and up to pump number 3. The lighting under the canopy was that kind of harsh blue-white fluorescent that makes everyone look a little sick. My breath came out in visible puffs as I stepped out of the car. I remember the sound of the highway behind me, that constant low roar that you stop noticing after a while, but that was somehow louder at 2 in the morning. A few moths orbited the light above the pump. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and pine and cold. I started the pump, tucked my chin into my collar and leaned against the car door. My phone was at maybe 12% battery, so I didn't bother pulling it out. I just stood there, listening to the mechanical click and rush of the pump, watching the dollar total tick upward. That's when I saw the truck. It was parked on the far side of the lot, away from the pumps entirely, up against the tree line where the concrete of the lot gave way to gravel and then dark grass. It was an older pickup, dark colored black or very dark blue. I couldn't tell in that light. It had been there when I pulled in, but I hadn't really registered it. The way you don't register cars in a parking lot until you have a reason to. What made me register it now was the simple fact that the engine was running. I could see the exhaust curling up in the cold air, lit orange, white by the distant pump lights. And the headlights were off, and nobody was getting out. I told myself it was nothing. Someone waiting for a friend inside the store, maybe. Someone who'd pulled off the highway to take a nap and left the engine running for heat. Entirely reasonable. Normal things that people do. I looked at the pump display, $7.40. The tank wasn't full yet. I looked back at the truck. The exhaust was still curling steadily. Whoever was in there, and I was now sure there was someone in there, was just sitting, just watching the lot, just idling in the dark. My stomach tightened a little, not a lot. Just that small contraction that your gut does when something registers as slightly off, but not yet dangerous. I shifted my weight and looked toward the store. Through the glass I could see the clerk, a young guy, maybe 19 or 20, sitting on a stool behind the counter with his head bent over his phone. He was completely absorbed. He wasn't watching the lot either. $9.80. Come on. A car came off the highway and pulled into the station. A woman in a minivan, probably late 30s or early 40s, traveling with what looked like a sleeping kid in the back seat. She parked at pump 1, closest to the store entrance, got out briskly and started her pump. She didn't look around. She seemed fine. Her presence made me feel slightly better, which I noticed and which made me slightly annoyed at myself. Why did I need another person nearby to feel okay about a parked truck on the edge of a lot? $12 and change. My tank was almost full. The minivan woman went inside the store. I watched her go through the glass doors, watched the clerk glance up from his phone briefly, watched her move to the drink coolers. Normal night, everything fine. I looked back at the truck. The headlights came on. They were aimed directly at me. I felt my heart rate jump. The lights hadn't been on before, I was sure of it, and now they were, full brightness, cutting across the lot, and the truck was beginning to roll forward. Slowly, not fast, not aggressively, just slowly moving forward out of its spot on the edge of the lot, rolling toward the pumps, toward me. The pump clicked off, full tank. I had the nozzle back in the cradle and my car door open in about 3 seconds flat. I didn't look at the truck. I looked at my keys already in my hand. I started the engine, pulled the door shut, and I left. I didn't pull out slowly. I pulled out and I drove, and I didn't stop again until I was back on the highway with a 1/4 mile of dark road between me and that station. Here's what I don't know, and what I've thought about many times since then. I don't know if that truck had simply been waiting for a pump and chose pump number 3 once I cleared it. I don't know if it was some guy who fell asleep with his headlights off and woke up as I was leaving. I don't know if it was someone visiting a friend who worked the night shift. I don't know any of those things. What I know is the feeling in my chest when those lights came on and that truck started moving. What I know is that I did not wait to find out, and I have never once in the years since second guessed that decision, because here's what I also know. When I got home that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, and I thought about the truck and the empty lot and the clerk who wasn't watching. And I thought about all the ways that the story could have continued if I'd stayed 1 more minute. If the pump had clicked off 30 seconds later, if the woman in the minivan hadn't pulled in when she did, if I'd been on my phone and not paying attention. The cold, specific fear of almost is sometimes worse than the fear of what actually happens. Almost is the thing that lives with you. About a year after that, I moved to a bigger city, got a new job, found an apartment, made new friends, and for a while I didn't think much about gas stations at 3 in the morning because I didn't have much reason to. Life was good and normal and ordinary. I worked regular hours, I had a social life, I was fine. Then I met Dara. Dara and I worked at the same company for about 8 months before we became friends. She was a data analyst, quiet and funny and careful in the way that observant people often are. Someone who noticed things that other people missed. She found out I had a horror channel and started sending me things, articles, Reddit threads, accounts from people she knew personally. One evening after work we got takeout and she told me this story. I'm going to share it exactly as she told it to me. She was 26. She'd driven up to visit her older sister in a city about 3 hours away, and on the drive back she'd left late because they'd been up talking and she hadn't wanted to cut the evening short. She was somewhere in the middle stretch of highway, a fairly remote section with farms on both sides and very little other traffic. When she realized she was running almost on empty, she knew there was a truck stop about 12 miles ahead, a big one, well lit, the kind with diesel lanes for 18-wheelers and a subway inside and a dozen pumps. She'd stopped there on previous drives. She decided to push to that one rather than stop at a smaller station she'd seen a few miles back that had looked almost closed, with only one of its 3 overhead lights working. She made it to the truck stop with maybe 20 miles of range left on the gauge. It was 3:15 in the morning. There were 2 semi-trucks idling on the far side of the lot, drivers presumably asleep in their cabs. There was a pickup truck refueling at one of the diesel pumps, and there was one other car at the regular pumps, a silver sedan, parked at pump 6, with the driver's side door open and nobody visibly inside or outside of it. Dara pulled up to pump 4, got out and started her transaction. She noticed the silver sedan. You notice everything in an empty lot at that hour, but she didn't go looking for the driver. She figured they'd gone inside. She started pumping and looked at her phone. After about a minute she heard footsteps. Not footsteps from the direction of the store. Footsteps from the side, from the edge of the canopy where the light faded into dark. She looked up and there was a man walking toward her. He was somewhere in his 40s, average height, wearing a flannel shirt and work pants, no coat despite the cold. He had a relaxed walk, hands loose at his sides, the easy pace of someone who wanted to look unhurried. "Hey," he said. "Hey, excuse me." Dara did what most people would do. She made eye contact and said, "Yeah. You got any jumper cables? My battery's dead, I think. Car just died on me." She looked over at the silver sedan. "Is that yours?" "Yeah, just died. You got cables." Here's the thing about that. The silver sedan had been there when Dara pulled in. The door had been open when she pulled in. She was fairly sure the engine had not been running when she pulled in, which means either the car had died in the 2 or 3 minutes before she arrived, or it had been there longer than that. But more than that, a man whose car died and who needs a jump is going to, logically, be right at his car or walking out of the store where he went to ask for help. He wasn't at his car. He wasn't coming from the store. He was coming from the edge of the lot, from the shadow outside the canopy, from a direction that had nothing in it. Dara told me she noticed this but processed it slowly, the way you do at 3 in the morning when your brain is fog-soft. She said, "I'm not sure, let me check my trunk." And she moved toward her trunk, and so did he. He moved with her. He stayed maybe 7 or 8 feet back, but he moved with her, anticipating her route, positioning himself between her and the driver's door of her car. Her trunk had a bag of emergency supplies. Her dad had put it together for her when she got her license, and she'd never removed it. She opened the bag, found the jumper cables rolled up in an orange mesh pouch, and that's when she also noticed, sitting right there in the bag, a window, breaking tool with a seatbelt cutter. Her hand closed around it without fully deciding to. She turned around with the cables and the tool both in her hands, the tool partially visible, and said, "Found them." He looked at her hands. He looked at the tool. Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, not cartoonishly, just a very small recalibration, and he said, "Great, yeah. Can you just pull your car around?" "Sure," she said. "Let me just text my boyfriend real quick. Tell him where I stopped, he always worries." She didn't have a boyfriend. She opened her phone and very conspicuously typed a long message and hit send. She actually did send it to her sister, just the address of the truck stop and the words "stopping here for gas, FYI." And when she looked up, the man was walking back toward the silver sedan. He got in, he started it started fine, no dead battery, no hesitation, and he drove away. She stood at pump 4 for a full 30 seconds after his taillights disappeared. Then she hung up the nozzle, got in her car, drove to the next exit, and sat in a McDonald's parking lot for 20 minutes before she felt steady enough to drive again. When she told me this, she said the thing that stuck with her most wasn't the fear she'd felt in the moment. It was the clarity afterward. The way all the pieces had lined up so neatly in her memory once she was sitting in the McDonald's parking lot with the heater running and her hands wrapped around a bad coffee. The open door when she pulled in, the approach from the shadows, the positioning between her and her car door. The story that didn't quite add up. She said it felt like she'd been standing in the middle of a picture she couldn't see, and then suddenly stepped back and the picture was completely visible, and she wished she hadn't been able to see it. She carried that window, breaking tool on her keychain for 2 years after that. The next story I want to tell you, I almost didn't include, because the person who told it to me asked me to change some details for their privacy. I've done that. The person's name, the state, some specifics have been altered, but the core of what happened is exactly as it was told to me. Marcus was 29, working as a traveling nurse, which means he was often in unfamiliar cities, often driving unfamiliar routes, often alone in the early morning hours when the rest of the world was asleep. It's a profession that puts you in that vulnerable window 2 to 4 in the morning, a strange city, a rental car or your own car loaded with luggage, GPS voice as your only company. He'd been doing it for 3 years by the time this happened, and he'd gotten used to the rhythms of it. He knew the best late night food spots in half a dozen cities. He knew which truck stops had clean bathrooms and which ones didn't. He'd gotten comfortable, maybe too comfortable, he told me, not reckless, just comfortable. He was on a 13-week contract in a city in the southeast. He worked overnight shifts, which meant leaving his short-term rental apartment around 10:30 p.m. and driving home around 7 a.m. The gas station he typically stopped at was a 24-hour convenience store and fuel stop about halfway between the hospital and his apartment, a route he did 6 nights a week. He'd been stopping there for about 5 weeks. He knew the overnight clerk by sight, a heavy-set older man who always had a sports talk radio station playing from a small portable radio behind the counter, and who had never said more than "got it" or "have a good one" in 5 weeks of transactions. That particular night, Marcus stopped as usual around 7:15 in the morning, just as the sky was going from dark to the pale gray blue of early dawn. He pumped gas, went inside to get coffee from the machine, and noticed there was a different clerk. A younger man, early 20s, with long hair in a loose bun and a zip-up hoodie under the store vest. He was stocking a cooler near the back. He gave Marcus a nod when he came in. Marcus made his coffee. Bad machine coffee, the kind that tastes like hot brown nothing, but by the end of an overnight shift you'll drink anything. He went to the counter to pay. The new clerk came to the counter and rang up the coffee. As he did, he looked up at Marcus and said, "You come in here pretty often, huh?" Marcus said, "Yeah, on my way home from work most nights." The clerk nodded. "I've seen you." He paused. "My first week here, Guy pointed you out." Marcus said, "What do you mean?" The clerk looked briefly uncomfortable, like he'd said something he wasn't sure he should have said. "Just, yeah, there was a guy in here one night last week. He asked me about you, what time you usually come in, whether you always came alone, stuff like that." Marcus's stomach went cold. "Not the coffee, hasn't. Kicked and cold, the other kind. What did he look like?" The clerk described someone Marcus didn't recognize. Medium height, dark jacket, baseball cap pulled low, maybe mid-30s. He'd come in around 3 a.m. mid-week, bought a bottle of water and asked about the guy who came in at 7. The black nurse works nights, was apparently how the man had described him. Marcus kept his voice even. "What did you tell him?" "I didn't know you then." The clerk said, "I told him I didn't know anything about any customer's schedule." He paused again. "Should I have told someone? I didn't know if it was a big deal." Marcus paid for the coffee. He thanked the clerk. He walked to his car, got in, locked the doors, and sat there. He spent the next 2 hours thinking through the previous 5 weeks, trying to remember if he'd seen the same car in the lot more than once, trying to remember if anyone had ever seemed to be watching him. He hadn't noticed anything. He was good at staying aware of his surroundings, but he'd been tired on those morning drives, end of shift tired, and the routine of the stop had made him less vigilant than he would have been. Somewhere new, he'd let himself become predictable. He'd let himself become easy to track. He called the property management company for his short-term apartment and asked about security cameras in the parking lot. He changed the time he left for work, started varying it by 30 to 45 minutes in either direction. He started stopping at a different gas station, a different one each week for the remainder of the contract. He never saw the man in the dark jacket. Nothing ever happened. But here's what Marcus told me very quietly at the end of the story. Nothing ever happening might just mean it didn't happen yet, and I was gone in 3 weeks anyway. So whoever it was, I don't know if they gave up or if they moved on or if I got lucky. I genuinely don't know, and I think about that sometimes, late at night. I think about the fact that I don't know. There's something about that particular kind of not knowing that sits differently than fear. Fear, at least, has an object. What Marcus described is something else. It's the open question. It's looking back at 5 weeks of ordinary mornings and wondering which one was the morning someone began to notice you. I think about it too. Every time I pull into a gas station at an odd hour, I think about how visible I am. I think about how predictable routine makes you. I think about all the things happening in a space that seem routine and aren't. The fourth story I want to share with you is the one I find hardest to tell because it happened to someone I know well. Someone close to me, and I'm going to be careful with it. Not because the details are too graphic, but because the details are too specific. I've changed enough that she won't be identifiable, and she's given me permission to tell it. She was 19. She'd borrowed her mom's car to drive to a late movie with a friend, and after the movie they'd gotten food, and then she'd dropped the friend off. And by the time she was headed home, it was close to 2 in the morning on a weeknight. She lived in a mid-sized town, nothing rural, nothing particularly isolated, but the route home from the theater district to her mom's house passed through a part of town that was light on businesses and heavy on warehouses and storage facilities, not scary in the daylight, just industrial. Functional, but at 2 a.m. it was the kind of street that had long gaps between lights. She stopped at a gas station at a corner she recognized from daytime drives. A BP, modest, 2 bays of pumps under a canopy, a small lit-up store. There was one other car at the pumps, someone already fueling on the opposite side. She started her transaction at the pump nearest the store. A man walked out of the store. This is where I want you to pay attention, because what she described wasn't dramatic. He didn't come at her, he didn't say anything threatening. He just walked out of the store and stood near the trash can by the door about 12 feet from her pump, and he looked at her. Not glanced. Looked. The sustained, unbothered look of someone who has decided they can. She looked back at him, the way you do when you want to establish that you've noticed someone. Sometimes that's enough. She'd been taught that direct eye contact was often a deterrent. She made eye contact. He didn't look away. He almost smiled, not a real smile, more like an acknowledgement, like he was pleased that she'd noticed. Like that was the point. She focused back on the pump. 40 cents, 80 cents, $1.20. The person who'd been fueling on the other side drove away. She heard the car leave. Suddenly, she was the only car under the canopy. She glanced at the man again. He was still there, still watching. He'd put his hands in his pockets, but his posture hadn't changed and his attention hadn't shifted. He was looking at her the way you look at a painting, steadily, without self-consciousness, like there was no reason not to. She looked at the store. Through the glass she could see the clerk, a woman, middle-aged, rearranging a rack of snacks near the door. Their eyes met briefly through the glass. The clerk didn't react to anything, which meant from inside the store the scene outside probably looked unremarkable. A woman fueling up. A man standing by the door. Nothing visually alarming. $3.40. She needed at least 15 to make it through the week without stopping again. She made a decision. She pulled the nozzle out of the tank, $4.10. Nowhere near full, hung it up, got in the car and drove away. She didn't make eye contact with the man again. She watched him in her side mirror as she pulled out, and she saw him step off the curb toward the pumps, just one step before he stopped. One step. She drove away, and that was it. She made it home, and she told her mom what happened, and they sat up for an hour talking about it. And her mom didn't dismiss her or tell her she was overreacting, which mattered, which was the right response. But here's what she told me that I think about all the time. She said the hardest part wasn't being scared. It was the calculus. It was standing there doing math in her head. Am I overreacting? Is this man just standing outside a store because he wants to stand outside a store, and I'm making something out of nothing? Am I going to drive away and feel stupid? Am I going to leave on $4 of gas and feel like I was paranoid? She said the whole time I was pumping I was trying to decide if what I was seeing was real, and I think that's the thing nobody talks about. The self-doubt is part of it. The wondering if you're wrong is part of how it works, because if you're always second, guessing yourself, you stay longer than you should. She drove away, and the one step he took as she pulled out, that told her everything she needed to know about whether she'd made the right call. Here is the last story. The one that I said would have a slow build, the one that took its time. I want you to stay with me on this one, because nothing obviously frightening happens for a while, and the build-up is important. The build-up is the entire point. His name was Trevor. He was 27, a grad student at a university in the Midwest, studying something in the social sciences. I want to say sociology, but I might be misremembering. He drove a lot, long stretches of highway between his university town and his hometown in a different state, a drive of about 5.5 hours that he did a handful of times each year. He'd driven it in all conditions, summer heat, winter ice, foggy autumn nights, and he'd developed a kind of intimate familiarity with the route. He knew where the speed traps were. He knew which rest stops were worth stopping at. He knew where the radio signal cut out and which towns had good 24-hour diners. This particular drive was in November, a Saturday night pushing into Sunday morning. He'd stayed at a friend's place the night before, was heading back to his university town because he had a deadline Monday and needed Sunday to work. He left his friend's city around midnight, hoping to be home by 6 a.m. He'd driven the route enough times in the dark that the 5+ hours didn't bother him. He made a coffee from a gas station, a real one this time, from a proper machine, not the bad brown, water kind, and he got on the highway feeling okay. Fine. Perfectly routine. The first few hours were uneventful in every way. Highway, darkness, music. He stopped once around 2:30 for a bathroom break at a rest stop, didn't linger, got back on the road. The traffic was the usual late, night sparse kind, occasional trucks, occasional headlights approaching and then gone, the lonely company of highway travel. Around 4 in the morning he needed gas. He was in a stretch of the drive that he'd always found a little bleak even in daylight. Flat farmland in all directions, few towns, exits spaced far apart. He knew from experience that the next gas station was at the exit for a small town, maybe 1,000 residents, a grain elevator visible from the highway. He'd stopped at the station there before. It was a Casey's General Store, a Midwest chain, clean enough, reliably open. He took the exit, the ramp curved down into the town. In the dark, small Midwestern towns at 4 in the morning have a specific quality to them. Deeply still, every house dark, grain elevator lit up against the black sky like a sentinel. The street empty in a way that feels less like sleeping and more like the town has been emptied out. It was the kind of stillness that sounds like something, if that makes sense. A fullness to the silence. He pulled into the Casey's lot. 3 other vehicles in the lot. A pickup parked near the store entrance, an older model, engine off, nobody visible inside that he could see. A newer sedan parked near the air pump on the side of the building, also unoccupied. And a white cargo van, windowless in the back, parked to the right of the main canopy area, off to the side where the lot met the road. The van's parking position was slightly unusual, not at a pump, not near the store, just sitting at a slight angle in the lot like it had pulled in and stopped without a clear destination. Trevor pulled up to pump 2, closest to the store, and started his gas. He was tired in that 4 a.m. way that isn't sleepy exactly, but is more like a mild dissociation from your own body, a faint unreality to everything. He was thinking about his apartment, his desk, his deadline, normal future, self things. He noticed the van because he noticed everything. He'd always been observant, hyper-aware of his environment, something he credited to a childhood spent in a household where you had to read the room. Constantly, the van was just there. Cargo vans park in gas station lots sometimes. Moving companies, delivery guys on overnight runs, tradespeople. Normal, he went inside to pay and grab a water. The Casey's was quiet inside. The clerk was a woman probably in her late 50s or early 60s, silver-haired, wearing a fleece pullover over her uniform. She had the practiced patience of someone who'd worked morning shifts for many years. She rang him up. They exchanged a few words about the weather, of frost, expected later in the week. And he went back out. That's when he saw the man, standing by pump 2, standing at Trevor's pump, just standing there. The man was maybe 50, wearing a dark coat, jeans, work boots. He was just standing at the pump, not using it, not leaning on it, just standing near it in a way that was hard to categorize. When Trevor came out the door, the man looked up at him, and then looked away, and stayed where he was. Trevor walked to the pump. The man didn't move. He was about 4 feet away. "Hey," Trevor said. The man looked at him again. "Hey," that was all. He didn't explain himself. Didn't say, "I was just checking my tire pressure." Didn't say, "Sorry, I was just standing here." didn't say anything else. Just hey, and then looked away again toward the white van. Trevor pulled his receipt from the pump and got in his car. He sat for a second before starting the engine. He looked at the van. The man was walking toward it now. Walking back toward it, casually, no hurry. He went around the passenger side out of view. Trevor started his car. He looked at the sedan parked near the air pump. He looked at the pickup by the store entrance. He thought about the layout of the lot. The van was positioned between the lot exit and the road. Not blocking it. There was room to pass, but positioned near enough to the exit that a vehicle from that spot could pull out in front of you, or alongside you, quickly, if it wanted to. He thought about the man who had been standing at his pump, looking at his car, and had gone back to the van. He thought about a long, dark, two-lane highway, and the 5 miles of farmland between this town and the on-ramp. He sat in the Casey's parking lot for 4 minutes. He watched the van. Nothing happened. Nobody got in or out. The van just sat there in the quiet, windowless, unreadable. Then he did something. He went back inside. He told the silver-haired clerk what he'd seen of the van, the man at his pump, the positioning near the exit. He wasn't dramatic about it. He said, "This might be nothing, but this is what I noticed, and I'm going to sit here for a few minutes before I go back on the highway. I just want you to know I'm here." She looked through the window at the van. Her face was unreadable. She said, "I can call the county police if you want. They patrol through here. Usually one comes by around 4:30, 4:40. He said yes, she called. He sat at a small table near the coffee station and waited. He watched the van through the window. At 4:38, a county sheriff's car came through the lot on a slow pass, and the white van pulled out of the lot, turned right, disappeared. The deputy came inside, got a coffee, listened to Trevor's account. He nodded. He said he'd do a pass on the highway ahead. He said, "You did the right thing stopping here." He said it flatly, without emphasis, the way someone says something they mean. Trevor got back on the highway at 4:45. He made it home before sunrise. He sat at his kitchen table for a while before he could sleep, not because he was shaking or panicking, but because he was doing that thing where you replay a sequence of small decisions and try to understand what each one meant. He'd noticed the van, he'd noticed the man, he'd gone back inside, he'd told someone. That chain of choices had taken maybe 12 minutes total. 12 minutes in a Casey's parking lot in a town he'd never thought much about. He told me that what he kept coming back to was the van positioning. Most people park near what they need, a pump, the store entrance. The van wasn't near anything it needed. It was near the exit, and the man hadn't been at the van. The man had been at his pump. And when Trevor came out of the store, the man had gone back to the van. What was he doing at the pump? Looking at the car, looking at the plates, looking at what was inside. Trevor didn't know. He didn't wait to find out. And a county deputy's headlights in a parking lot at 4:30, 8 in the morning, had been enough to send the van away into the dark, which tells you something about what the van wanted, which was something that wouldn't survive being seen. I've been collecting these stories for a few years now. Gas stations, rest stops, late, night lots. These places come up again and again in the accounts people share with me. And I've thought a lot about why these places specifically, why the early morning hours at a well-lit, seemingly safe, public location produce so many stories like these. I think part of it is the vulnerability gap. You're in transit, you're between places, you've left the safety of wherever you were, and you haven't yet arrived at wherever you're going. The gas station is a pause, a liminal space, a moment when the usual protections of home or destination are absent and you're briefly in the open. You're visible, your occupied fuel cap off, card inserted, pump running, your attention divided between the machine and your phone and the cold night air. You are, briefly, perfectly distractible. And most people who use those hours to be at those places are exactly what they seem: travelers, workers, people on the road for reasons that have nothing to do with anyone else. Most nights, nothing happens. Most stops are just stops. The pump clicks off, you replace the nozzle, you get back in your car, you drive away, and you never think about it again. But enough things happen in those spaces, in those hours, to the people who move through them, that I think we owe it to ourselves to stay awake, to stay aware, to not let routine dull the part of our brain that pays attention, to notice the truck idling in the shadows, the man who comes from the wrong direction, the question that doesn't quite make sense, the car parked near the exit with no reason to be there. You don't have to be afraid. You don't have to live in a state of constant hypervigilance, looking over your shoulder, unable to function. That's not what I want to leave you with. What I want to leave you with is something simpler and more practical than fear. I want to leave you with attention, with the quiet, steady practice of noticing, of trusting the small contraction in your stomach before you can even name why, of not staying to be polite, of driving away with less gas than you wanted, of going back inside, of telling someone. The people in these stories who came through okay weren't particularly brave or particularly skilled. They were just paying attention. They felt the thing that felt off before they understood it, and they acted on it before they talked themselves out of it. That is the skill. That is the only skill that matters in those moments. Tonight, I hope you sleep well. I hope your next late night drive is long and boring and safe. I hope every gas station you pull into smells like cold air and cheap coffee and nothing else. I hope every other car in the lot drives away the moment you pull up, and that the clerk is awake, and that your tank fills fast, and that the highway ahead of you is empty and ordinary and takes you home without incident. But if something feels wrong, if some detail catches in the back of your mind and won't quite let go, a car in the wrong place, a person who appears from the wrong direction, a question that doesn't quite add up, please remember what you read here tonight. Please remember that you don't owe anyone a second chance to prove that they mean no harm. Get back in your car, drive away. And if you want to know the most frightening thing I've learned from all of these stories, from all these nights, from all these people who stopped to refuel and felt the slow, cold certainty that something was wrong, it's this: in every single case, the person said they almost stayed. They almost talked themselves into staying. They ran the math. They questioned themselves. They thought about how stupid they'd feel if it turned out to be nothing. And they left anyway. That's the part that saved them. Stay safe out there. Thank you for spending this night with me. And the last thing I'll tell you, the thing I want you to carry with you when you close your eyes tonight, is that the scariest moment of any of these stories was never the moment the danger became clear. It was always the moment just before, in the ordinary, humming, fluorescent quiet of a gas station at 3 in the morning, when everything still looked fine and something deep and wordless inside the person standing there knew that it wasn't.